On the edge of the Peak District National Park lies Sheffield, a city built on an honest and hard-working industrial past. But in January 2000, life for one community here would never be the same again.
In the whole of my 17 years with South Yorkshire Police, this is one case I will never forget.
For behind closed doors, this city hides the darkest of secrets that would shock, disturb.
This is actually the most gruesome body I've seen.
And shake the foundations of a small and respectable neighbourhood forever.
People really wanted to know the truth, hoping that, in fact, this will be like a nightmare that will go away. But it didn't.
Sheffield, a city built on rolling hillsides, leafy, green and safe.
We're only about 2 or 3 miles from the Peak District, where we've got all that beautiful scenery and the Pennines.
From the national crime figures, Sheffield was recently recognised as being the safest city in the country, and it keeps that accolade year on year.
It's a safe place to bring up a family.
But a tragic story was about to unfold here, where greed and betrayal would send shockwaves through one close-knit community. In 2000, Kettlebridge Road was off the beaten track, quiet and undeveloped. On January the 22nd, friends Glyn and Chris were walking to a tool shop when they spotted something out of the ordinary.
We were walking down just talking and laughing and joking, and as we were walking on, we just saw this pink cloth bundle, as it were. It wasn't hidden at all, it was in plain view. It was like just waiting to be found. It were quite new and clean, so we knew it had just been put there.
Could be worse, hadn't it?
Well, we undid the blanket, and inside blanket there were an old doll. We opened old doll up, which looked fairly brand new, and we took out like a big plastic sheet, and that was all tied up as well. And it smelt of diesel. My friend, he says it could be an engine or American horse saddle.
Thinking they may have found something of value, Glyn and Chris decided to examine it properly.
And it's about here, just here, where we actually opened bag. But I couldn't really make out what it were because it was such a funny shape. It was just a weird shape.
They unwrapped the bundle and had the shock of their lives.
Chris.
And I touched top and it was all brown, like clay. I looked and could see it was a dead body. And that was it, that's the last time. I won't look at it again.
Shaken by this gruesome find, Glyn immediately called the police.
My fingers turned to rubber. I'm trying to phone and trying to phone up, and my fingers were just, I just couldn't get them to work. It's like my brain didn't know how to work my fingers.
Yeah, police.
Detective Constable John Cousins was on duty at South Yorkshire Police that fateful night.
About 4 o'clock, the phone rang in the office, and it was one of the call handlers to say that somebody had found a package on Kettlebridge Road in Sheffield, and inside they believed they'd found a body. Obviously, we needed to get there as soon as possible to see what they found.
Within minutes, the police arrived on the scene to examine the contents of the bag.
It was curled up, sort of tucked up in a fetal position. Couldn't really see whether there was any hair or any clothing. So badly decomposed, we just had a quick look, and as soon as we realised that it was a human body, we've backed away and left it where it was until the forensics team could arrive. That was probably the first time I'd seen a body that was so badly decomposed or in that state.
It wasn't only DC Cousins who was stunned by what he saw. 25 years in the force hadn't prepared Detective Bob Very for what had been dumped in Kettlebridge Road.
Like most police officers, I have seen dead bodies on numerous occasions. This is actually the most gruesome body I've seen in terms of its decomposition. To achieve that state of decomposition, it would have been dead for a number of years.
The state of the body was in stark contrast to the condition of the bag it was in.
The bag itself looked very clean and new to look at. That certainly didn't look as if it had been there a long time, considering the time of year that it was.
It was clear that the person hadn't died there and had been actually put there.
A full-scale investigation was mounted by South Yorkshire Police.
But from my perspective, there were actually three major lines of inquiry. The first line of inquiry was the location where the body was actually found. The second line of inquiry was the body wrappings itself, the sheets and the plastic and the carrier bags. And the final line of inquiry was the body itself.
The decomposed remains were taken to the mortuary for a thorough post-mortem examination.
We weren't actually sure at that time whether it was a male or a female, and we certainly didn't know who it was or why it was there, or in fact how it had died.
Detectives were hoping the post-mortem would give them some clues as to who this person was.
Once we identified the body, then the pieces of the jigsaw would actually fit together.
However, identifying the body was to prove a huge hurdle.
The decomposition of this body extended to all the major organs. It was not just the flesh of the body. So we had difficulty establishing whether this was a male or a female.
But the post-mortem did reveal two vital clues about the person's history.
The lungs of this person were quite damaged and were quite black, which indicated that either they'd been a heavy smoker throughout their life or had worked in some kind of heavy industry.
There was some abnormality with the chewing surfaces of the teeth, but other than that, there was nothing from that first post-mortem.
After a second post-mortem, the police still had insufficient evidence to identify the body. The only way forward was to strip away the layers of decomposition and get under the body's skin.
We needed an expert in skeletons to become involved, and they defleshed the body that we had.
The corpse was stripped of its flesh and boiled for 3 weeks, and although extreme, the procedure was to provide police with their first real breakthrough.
From that skeleton, we were able to establish that it was a male. There was indications that the deceased had been subject to operations on both his feet, and this person was somewhere between 50 and 60 years of age.
The pathologist revealed that the operations on the dead man's feet were for bunions. He also found that the man had suffered from arthritis, and one of his fingertips was missing.
South Yorkshire Police had no record as to who this person might be. There was nobody missing that fitted this profile.
Still without an identity, the police concentrated on the wrappings in which the body was found. As it was discovered in winter, detectives believed the sheets around the body should have been significantly more weathered than they were. They were sent for detailed forensic examination. The soil and leaves found on the sheets were analysed by a botanist.
The botanist was able to establish that the body had been exposed to the elements in the autumn of the previous year, which gave us the clearest indication that it had been moved from the place where it died around about autumn of 1999.
As the body was found 3 months later, in January 2000, this new evidence confirmed to detectives that someone may have attempted to hide this man's death.
For whatever reason, this person's death had been concealed, and had been concealed for a number of years. And for whatever reason, that the body had recently been deposited on Kettlebridge Road. If that was the case, was there a more sinister reason for actually concealing this particular person's death?
By March 2000, the investigating team still hadn't identified the body, and the pressure was on.
So if we didn't identify the person, then it could well have been that we had to close the inquiry down.
The clock was ticking for detectives to turn this investigation around, and in a final attempt to crack the case, they turned to a forensic technique they had never used before.
This was actually the last throw of the dice, because there was nowhere else for us to go.
I think that's an interesting thing.
This one piece will make 52 layers.
Watch on mobile devices or the big screen. All for free. No subscription required.
After 2 postmortems, a defleshing and extensive forensic examinations, South Yorkshire Police were still unable to identify the decomposed human remains dumped by the side of a road in Sheffield in January 2000.
This was a unique investigation because we had an unidentified body, no crime scene, and no cause of death in the initial stages of the inquiry.
It was clear it was going to be difficult to find out who the person was and who was responsible because the body was so badly decomposed. There was nothing at the early stage, once we looked at it, to give us a clue at all as to who this person could have been.
And so we turned to a new technique which had never been used previously by South Yorkshire Police.
The body's face was going to be reconstructed in clay from its skull by a specialist team from Sheffield University.
Facial reconstruction is generally the last resort and isn't used very often at all. But in cases where you've got an unidentified body and you don't have any DNA evidence or anything else that helps to identify them, facial reconstruction can make a really big difference.
Nikki Taylor was one of the team responsible for creating the face.
I'd never worked on a facial reconstruction case, certainly not a forensic case before, and so I was really excited.
Individual skulls are particularly unique and determine the size and shape of your features.
Whilst we can never get the defined features of someone's nose and someone's mouth, we can get a very good similarity, that we can get the shape of their face and get a good resemblance to that individual. We were able to establish that the skull was from someone of Caucasian origin, but that could be someone from the UK, but could also be someone from the Middle East. So we decided to make 2 different casts to cover those different options.
The painstaking process took Nikki and the team over a week to complete.
It's almost like a reverse dissection process, and we layer the muscles that are closest to the skull first and then the more superficial muscles on afterwards. Once we've got all of the muscles in place, that helps to give the face some shape, and then it's at that point we put on what we would call the skin layer.
It was quite exciting waiting for that to be done to see whether or not, at the end of it all, we would actually have a face that we could work on.
While the face was evolving, a detailed examination of the skull's teeth gave the police an important new clue.
The surfaces of the teeth were actually extremely flat, and that was an indication that there was some type of constant chewing.
Arabic parts of the world chew what's known as catweed, where they continually chew quite often throughout the day, and that grinds the teeth down.
With this new information, detectives began focusing their attention on the clay head with the more Middle Eastern features.
along with all the other medical facts they got, which indicated the ethnicity of this particular individual, it was becoming more and more apparent that we were looking at a member of an ethnic minority community.
On the 20th of March 2000, South Yorkshire Police finally came face to face with the man whose badly decomposed body had been discovered 3 months earlier.
When the clay head was made, we finally had an image. We had a face that we could finally put to this body, or give us a good indication as to what this person would have looked like.
Although their unidentified body now had a face, detectives still needed someone to recognise him.
The image gave us a fresh impetus with the inquiry and allowed us to go nationwide.
We distributed and publicised this picture as far and wide as was possible, including national television.
With such extensive publicity, the investigating team felt sure that someone would recognise the face, but no one came forward.
Facial reconstruction works on instant recognition, so we were of the view that either we would get him identified really quickly or we would never find out who he was.
In terms of publicity, we'd done everything that we could, all of which did not bring about the identification of this person.
Just as the police were giving up hope of ever establishing who this man was, the phone rang.
One afternoon, out of the blue, we had a call from a member of our staff, a person who was working for South Yorkshire Police, who thought he knew the identity of this particular individual.
Our colleague had opened a copy of the Sheffield Star and had seen the photographs of the clay head and the various pictures that we'd done, and read the description. And on reading that, he was quite shocked to realise it was very similar to somebody that he knew and from his community, and who he'd not seen or heard of for a couple of years.
It was actually the first positive identification we got in the inquiry. It wasn't, I think it might be. He said, I am confident that that is Mohammed Nasser Ali. When you look at the picture and you look at the reconstruction that was undertaken, the similarity is absolutely staggering.
Now we actually had a name to work with, and this was a good lead and a clear lead for us to do some more inquiries and to establish whether or not this person was, had been the body that we had recovered.
With a name to work on for the very first time, the police began to look into the records of Mohammed Nasser Ali, a retired steelworker, who had come to live in Sheffield in the 1960s from the Middle Eastern country, Yemen.
Mohammed was a key member of the Yemeni community in Sheffield, very influential, very charismatic. He was very loud. He would be seen by people. Wherever he was, he would be noticed. And he tried his best to do the best for his family and even the community as much as he could do.
Mohammed was a very generous person and very likable to the community, and he was kind as well and a person of value. He's the kind of person that wanted to help people all the time.
But Mohammed had not been reported missing to the police.
It was important that we actually make contact with the family, and obviously that was with a view to establishing if he was still there, if this was a case of mistaken identity.
DC John Cousins headed straight to the address their colleague had given them.
This elderly lady answered the door. We showed our identification, made sure that she knew who we were, and talked through why we were there. It turned out that she was divorced from Mohammed Nasser Ali and had been so for about 3 years. She told us that she believed he was in the Yemen or in Saudi Arabia.
Despite being confident that her ex-husband was abroad, Fatima revealed that Mohammed's medical profile was very similar to that of the unidentified body.
She confirmed that he'd had an operation to his feet because of bunions, and also lost the tip of his finger during an accident several years ago.
Both of which were key characteristics of the dead man.
What Fatima was telling us was obviously quite crucial to the inquiry, so we telephoned that through to the incident room so that further inquiries could be done whilst we were speaking to Fatima.
Suddenly we were faced with what was a relatively slow time inquiry picking up pace quite dramatically. The office staff were actually making contact with the GP and dentist to actually confirm the information that we already had. Everything was pointing very positively to the fact that this body that we discovered was in fact Mohammed Nasser Ali.
So you've not seen him at all? No.
However, Mohammed's ex-wife Fatima was insistent that he was abroad, and this was backed up by her son Hassan, who arrived at the house soon afterwards.
He told me that he was alive and well and living in Saudi Arabia. And I asked how he knew this, and he said that he had letters from him, and he showed us those letters.
On closer examination, DC Cousins could see that there was something not quite right about the letter supposedly written by Mohammed to his son.
There was writing on the letter that was obvious straight away. It was different writing. It was in different coloured ink, but he was adamant that this was from his father, and he was alive and well.
And it wasn't just Mohammed's family that believed him to be out of the country. His friends and neighbours were also under the impression he was abroad, as he had not been seen by anyone for over 2 years.
Mohammed has always been a big part of the community, and at one stage he wasn't around anymore.
He just disappeared from the community.
The questions people were asking about Mohammed was simply, where is he? People will be told that he's in Mecca.
Mecca is a holy city in Saudi Arabia and the centre of the Islamic world.
It's very possible for a Muslim to decide to move to Mecca. And for someone in Mohammed's age, it's even more possible that that was the case. And people just simply left it at that.
Whilst many of Mohammed's friends accepted this story, others were not convinced.
People go to Mecca nearly every year from Sheffield, but no one said that he met them there. And for Mohammed to devote to be there all his time, I think it was a bit suspicious.
Back at the house, Hassan was helping police with their inquiries.
He gave us an identification card and a driving licence, which had a photograph of his father. Hassan got these items from a briefcase which contained a lot of documents, all sorts of things relating to his father and to himself, to money transfers from Sheffield out to the Yemen, and also we found a copy of a flight ticket in his father's name.
Presented with so much conflicting information, police felt they needed to talk to Hassan more thoroughly.
Hassan agreed to come with us to the police station whilst we were waiting for the results of the other inquiries that were taking place. Checks were being made at the GP practice for Mohammed Nasser Ali, and we hadn't got those results yet.
When that information finally came through, it proved vital to identifying the body.
We were given the news that the GP had confirmed that the details of his patient, Mohammed Nasser Ali, were similar to that of our profile, in that he had got a missing fingertip, he had had an operation on bunions on his feet, and he suffered from arthritis.
The police felt confident at last that they had identified their mystery body.
All the information we now had was pointing directly towards the body being that of Mohammed Nasser Ali. However, we'd got his son, Hassan, telling us that he believed him to be safe and well. Why would he lie?
After a number of interviews, police began to find further discrepancies in what Hassan was telling them.
There were some inconsistencies with his story, because he'd jumped from him being in Saudi Arabia to him being in Yemen. He was telling us about the fact his father had wished to go out to get married, but he wasn't sure who he was getting married to. So there were one or two things just weren't ringing true about what he was saying.
Like the police, Mohammed's friends and neighbours had also been given conflicting stories about his whereabouts from his family.
Sometimes they said he's in Saudi Arabia, sometimes he said, okay, stayed in Saudi Arabia for a bit and then went back to Yemen. and some of the answers is in Oman. So they get like a mixed answer because people did talk.
Either Hassan was mistaken in what he was saying or he was telling lies. If he was telling lies, that would be a motive, in our view, to establish the fact that he knew something about his father's death.
With overwhelming circumstantial evidence all pointing to Hassan hiding the truth about his father's death, the police were left with no alternative.
Somebody somewhere wasn't telling us the truth. We weren't happy with what Hassan was telling us. So at that point he was arrested on suspicion of murder.
Using facial reconstruction, South Yorkshire Police had identified the decomposed body found dumped in Sheffield as 75-year-old Mohammed Nasser Ali. Detectives had still not established how, when or why he had died. Although his son Hassan had been arrested on suspicion of murder, he continued to insist his father had moved abroad.
He just kept continuing to tell us he's alive, and the body, he didn't know who that was, but it wasn't that of his father. Hassan even told us that his father had rung him from the Yemen back in 1997, and the fact that had he phoned, he must be alive and he must be safe and well.
News of his arrest sent shockwaves through the neighbourhood.
People in the community and even in Sheffield couldn't believe what's happened. I mean, a lot of members couldn't absorb it at that time.
People really wanted to know the truth, almost hoping that in fact this will be like a dream, a nightmare that will go away, but it didn't.
At Attercliffe police station, just as detectives had reached stalemate with Hassan, another family member arrived who would blow the case wide open.
Hassan arrived, who was Mohammed Nasser Ali's grandson. I went out to speak to him at the front desk, and he told me that he wished to tell me how his grandfather had died.
17-year-old Kassan was Hassan's son. He was brought to the UK from the Yemen at the age of 2 and was taken in by his grandfather Mohammed.
Kassan, to some extent, used to respect his granddad, sometimes we call him dad as well, respect him very well, and Mohammed, at the same talking, he used to look after him and treated him like his son.
Mohammed brought Kassan up and was keen for him to get a good education. After separating from his wife Fatima, Mohammed moved 20 miles north of Sheffield to Doncaster and bought a house in his grandson's name.
He was generous with him. Kassan had what any child would wish to have at the time.
Kassan's father Hassan came to the UK in 1997 and moved in, but family life became strained.
When I spoke to Kassan in an interview, he was telling us that in October of 1997, himself, his father Hassan, had had an argument with his grandfather, Mohammed Nasser Ali, and that same night, following this argument, his grandfather had died during his sleep.
This dramatic turn of events had occurred after an argument over money. Since arriving in the UK, Hassan had been demanding handouts from his father, and Mohammed had had enough.
When Kassan said his grandfather had died in his sleep, bearing in mind his general age, that was actually a realistic prospect.
Whilst this explanation initially seemed reasonable, what Kassan went on to tell detectives made no sense at all.
He went on to say that they then decided to bury the body in the cellar of that address. We asked Kassan what was supposed to happen and what he should do when somebody died, and he just looked bemused. He was telling us a story which looked as if his grandfather had died naturally, and the only thing they'd done wrong was to dispose of the body in the way that they did.
The fact that they had hidden the body and not reported his death to the police aroused suspicions.
Why would somebody bury a relative in this way? Why would they have to conceal their body? If he died of natural causes, the proper and correct way is to notify the authorities and deal with the body correctly.
To verify Kassan's version of events that night, police needed to get Hassan's side of the story.
No comment.
We then interviewed Hassan further and told him what his son Kassan was telling us and what he was confessing to what had taken place. And at this point, Hassan then refused to speak to us anymore.
Yet again, the police had hit a brick wall, but overnight, events would take a dramatic turn.
The following morning when we got to work, we were told that Kassan wanted to speak to us some more. So we went for another interview with Kassan, and at this point, he changed the story again. Kassan told us that his grandfather hadn't, in fact, died in his sleep. He told us that he'd heard his father arguing with his grandfather, and this argument was getting more and more heated. Kassan explained that he went into the living room where this argument was taking place, and at this point he saw his grandfather laid on the floor with blood coming from his neck, and his father was holding a knife, standing over him.
Kassan went on to say that they dragged the body into the kitchen, where it was left overnight.
The next morning, they then cleared up the house, washing the knife in the sink, washing the kitchen floor, and they then placed the body in the cellar of the house.
Kassan's dramatic revelations left detectives astounded.
These were big claims that we were getting from Kassan. They were quite a surprise because from the previous day we'd got Hassan telling us his father was alive and well, and then we went to Kassan telling us all about how he died in his sleep, to now how his father had murdered his grandfather and he had helped in disposing of the body.
Detectives put Kassan's accusations of murder to his father.
Hassan was quite clearly shocked from what we were telling him, but he was adamant he wasn't going to tell us his version of the events. He stayed exactly as he had been by saying no comment to every question we asked him.
Because of Hassan's refusal to talk, police needed evidence to support Kassan's story.
It was important that we actually try and corroborate what Kassan was saying forensically, if that was at all possible.
Detectives raced to the house in Doncaster, the scene of the alleged crime.
Now at Palmer Street, we did find, with the help of forensic scientists, a trail of blood in the main living area, which led to the cellar head.
Kassan had explained that he'd wrapped his grandfather up in a settee cover and then carried him down into the cellar of the house, where they placed him into a trunk and then built the tomb around the trunk.
Hassan and Kassan had gone to great lengths to conceal that body. They'd actually made a makeshift tomb out of brick and then put flagstones over the top of that.
They then painted the entire tomb to make it look just like a structure inside the cellar.
As well as bloodstains on the lounge carpet, forensic scientists also matched foliage from the garden to foliage found with the decomposed body more than 20 miles away.
And significantly, we found propped up outside the house a broom. And on that broom was green paint. In that green paint was a fingerprint, which ultimately was identified as being Hassan's fingerprint.
This evidence put Hassan at the scene of the crime and implicated him in the subsequent cover-up. However, he continued to deny everything.
Hassan didn't want to know what we were saying and just wouldn't answer any more questions from that point on. At the end of the interviews with Hassan, we asked him if he was willing to let his son stand alone for what had taken place, to which he said, "The truth will avail."
Whilst evidence was stacking up against Hassan, police were also starting to question Kassan's involvement in events that night.
Kassan also explained that the argument had also been about the transfer of the property of Palmer Street back into his grandfather's name from his own. He wasn't happy with this.
When detectives got hold of the deeds of the property, they found Mohammed had transferred ownership from Kassan's name into his own. But they could also see the deeds had later been changed back again.
Kassan had changed those deeds back into his own name so that he again was the owner of the property. And it appears that this took place after the death of his grandfather. There were documents which we could show had been forged by somebody back in the Yemen and sent through to the land registry here in the UK and to the solicitors here, quite clearly fraudulently.
With evidence of this motive for murdering his grandfather, detectives could see Kassan was far from innocent.
It is clear that Hassan was the person who used the knife on him. But our view was that this was a joint venture and that it was a premeditated and planned murder to ensure their financial security together.
Kassan throughout his interviews denied that he was responsible for killing him. But because of what he did, he was as guilty as his father because they clearly had conspired together to dispose of the body.
With proof mounting to support the theory that both men were involved in the murder, detectives were left with only one option.
As a result of all the evidence that we found at the house and because of the confessions that Kassan had made, both men were charged with murder.
The family's friends and neighbours could not believe the nightmare that was unfolding.
The fact that Mohammed had died was in itself a shock. But even more shocking was the fact that it was revealed that his son and grandson had been arrested on suspicion of the murder. That was beyond comprehension. It really had a massive impact on the community.
Detectives had charged the two men they believed were responsible for Mohammed's death, but they still needed to clarify and prove their motive for murder.
At this point, we had a confession as to how Mohammed Nasser Ali had died, but we still didn't know why he had to die and how, 2 years later, his body was found at the side of Kettlebridge Road in Sheffield.
After a 3-month investigation, detectives had charged the son and grandson of Mohammed Nasser Ali with his murder. Police believed they had concealed the crime by burying his body in a tomb in the basement of the family house in Doncaster, where they had carried on life as normal.
Both Hassan and Kassan continued to live at Palmer Street in Doncaster for quite considerable time after they buried their grandfather in the cellar. Throughout this time, whenever asked, Hassan was telling people who knew and wanted to know the whereabouts of Mohammed Nasser Ali the same story that he was telling us.
Both father and son had successfully kept up the pretense that Mohammed was living back in the Middle East.
I didn't notice anything about Hassan or Ghassan, anything that's different. At the time, there just simply wasn't anything, to me, that would suggest anything untoward has happened.
But in the months following Mohammed's disappearance, some friends started to notice a difference in Hassan and Kassan's spending habits.
When we began speaking to people in the Yemeni community, we quickly realised that they had noticed a change in the lifestyle of Hassan and Kassan. It was noticeable that they had come to some money and were spending it.
But these friends had no idea what had gone on behind closed doors. Detailed investigations into Mohammed Nasser Ali's bank accounts uncovered a series of unusual financial dealings.
We found a treasure trove of evidence for the financial transactions that had taken place.
We discovered the fact that money had been, prior to his death, taken out from Mohammed Nasser Ali's account by either Kassan or Hassan, but subsequently, since he was murdered, his state benefits were being paid into an account to which both Hassan and Kassan had access to, and they used those funds.
This money trail also extended abroad.
we discovered a number of transactions for quite significant values, up to £6,500, going from the UK back to Aden in the Yemen, and subsequently on to the wife of Hassan, who still lived over in Aden.
We were able to establish that Hassan had started to build a house in the Yemen, and clearly the funds from his father's estate was going to fund that project.
Detectives also investigated the copy of an unused plane ticket to Yemen in Mohammed Nasser Ali's name, dated just before his disappearance in August 1997.
Those inquiries led us to a person that the Yemeni community used in Sheffield, who would buy and sell tickets for people wishing to go back to the Yemen. He told us that he had purchased the ticket, having been asked by Mohammed Nasser Ali back in August of 1997 for a journey he wished to take. He then received a phone call from Hassan stating that his father no longer to use that ticket, and because he had no reason to think otherwise, he managed to refund that ticket for them.
This planned trip to Yemen had been a cause for concern for Hassan and Kassan.
It appears that Mohammed Nasser Ali was planning to return to the Yemen, possibly to get married again and to set up a different life. Because of this, Hassan and Kassan realised that their source of income wouldn't be as good. They had already transferred money from his account without his knowledge, and I believe that once he found out about this, that is when the argument started, and that is what led up to his death.
Both Hassan and Kassan had a considerable amount of financial motive for killing Mohammed Nasser Ali.
Not content with living off Mohammed's benefits, savings and pension for nearly 2 years after his murder, and confident that they had got away with their crime, Hassan and Kassan wanted more.
It all started to go wrong when they decided to sell the house in Doncaster. They were obviously concerned about selling a house that got a body in the cellar in case it was discovered. So they decided that they would go and remove the body and dispose of it elsewhere.
Kassan's confession revealed how they had exhumed his grandfather's body from its makeshift tomb, and police corroborated this with the discovery of credit card receipts.
Kassan, following the instructions of his father, went to a DIY store where he bought some plastic sheeting, a shovel and some other items in order to remove the body from the house. His father had also told him to buy some diesel because he knew that that would hide the smell of the decomposition of the body.
The two men broke open the tomb, removed the body of Mohammed Nasser Ali from the trunk, and wrapped up his decomposed remains before placing them in a sports bag and burning the trunk.
Using Kassan's car, they put the bag in the boot of the car with the grandfather's body inside and drove to Sheffield, and they literally threw the body out from the back of the car onto the side of Kettlebridge Road.
I think they were quite convinced that because of the badly decomposed state of the body, that it would never be identified.
But Hassan and his son had no idea that Mohammed's discarded remains held a wealth of forensic information that allowed the police to identify him and ultimately uncover the crime. In March 2001, Hassan Nasser and his son Kassan Mohammed were tried for the murder of Mohammed Nasser Ali at Sheffield Crown Court. Both pleaded not guilty. Details from Kassan's signed confession led police to collect substantial forensic evidence, which placed both men at the scene of the crime and implicated them in its cover-up. This, combined with evidence of a series of financial embezzlements, resulted in a swift outcome. In just a week, both men were found guilty of murder and sentenced to life in prison for an act that the judge described as violent and brutal.
It is rewarding when such hard work results in a conviction, because It was a brutal murder, and both Qassam and Hassan deserved their sentences.
It was extremely satisfying for the team to, first of all, identify Mohammed Nasser Ali, but even more satisfying to secure the conviction of the two people responsible for his murder.
For Mohammed's other relatives, friends and neighbours, justice had been done.
When they were given their life sentences, people were just glad that it was over. It was the end. For many people, the end of a really dark chapter in the life of the Yemeni community in Sheffield.
What Hassan and Qassam did was considered by a lot of Yemenis as insane, and the Yemeni community would not get over it easily.
And it's sad that a man like Mohammed Nasser Ali should end his life in such a brutal manner, with little or no compassion from the very close members of his family.
He did not deserve to die in the way that he did. He will always be remembered and will always be missed.